At some point in life, almost everyone has felt that strange disconnection, being present in a conversation and yet feeling absent, saying it's all good when it clearly isn't, accepting commitments that you secretly wish would be cancelled, adapting your tone of voice, gestures, even the choice of words as the audience changes. Deep down, it seems normal. This is what we call coexistence, education, knowing how to behave. But sociologist Erving Goffman warns us that there is something much deeper and more dangerous behind these everyday gestures. He called it impression management, a kind of constant social performance where, in each new environment, with each new person, the individual plays a different role to be accepted, approved, or simply tolerated. According to Goffman, social life functions like a theatre. We are all, consciously or not, on distinct stages: the work stage, the family stage, the social media stage, the relationship stage. And in each of them, we dress, behave, and express ourselves in a calculated manner to achieve a specific goal, to ensure belonging and maintain the desired image. It seems harmless, even inevitable. But the price of this constant performance is high: the fragmentation of the self. The individual divides into multiple versions of themselves that do not recognize each other, and none of them is entirely true. It's like living with several masks and, at some point, forgetting what the original face was. This fragmentation leads to what Goffman described as role distance, a subtle yet devastating form of dissociation. The person performs actions, follows routines, interacts, but is emotionally disconnected from what they do. They operate on autopilot, following invisible scripts written by external expectations. And this phenomenon is more common and more destructive than one might think. People spend decades living this way, as if watching their own life from the outside, trapped in characters they were forced to play until they become strangers to themselves. This video is a deep dive into this silent process of self-betrayal. The aim here is not just to inform, but to confront. To show clearly that living to please others may be socially rewarded, but spiritually impoverishing. That saying yes when you want to say no, hiding emotions for fear of rejection, and living for external validation are not small social sacrifices. They are systematic renunciations of one's own essence. Goffman did not just offer a critique, but a call to awareness. He shows us that it is possible to collapse these social stages, not destructively, but strategically. Refusing to continue playing false roles may cause ruptures, yes. Some audiences will withdraw, but those who remain will finally get to know the real person behind the performance. And more importantly, that person, you, will also be able to recognize themselves. So, if you feel that something is wrong, that you are too tired for reasons you don't understand, that you smile in photos but live in silence inside, this video is for you. Here begins the path back to yourself. Erving Goffman revolutionized sociology by proposing that human behavior, especially in social contexts, can be understood as a theatrical performance. For him, every interaction is a performance. Each individual, when presenting themselves to others, sets up a kind of stage, defining a narrative, choosing body language, adopting a speaking style, and carefully constructing the impression they wish to make. This process was termed by Goffman as impression management, a form of constant social performance where, in each new environment, with each new person, the individual plays a different role to be accepted, approved, or simply tolerated. When you enter a work meeting, for example, you adjust your language to appear competent. When visiting family, you might omit important parts of your life to avoid judgment. On a romantic date, you carefully choose what to show, and even more, what to hide. Most of these actions seem natural, even desirable. After all, we live in society, And adapting to others is part of coexistence, right? But Goffman confronts us with an uncomfortable question. How much of this performance is choice, and how much is submission? The truth is that the modern subject has internalized the need to please so much that they have lost the reference of what is authentic. It is not just about small omissions or social adjustments. We are talking about a continuous abandonment of one's own inner truth. This permanent performance eventually becomes identity. The mask, over time, sticks to the face. What was once strategy transforms into essence. What was temporary becomes definitive. Goffman warns us that, by playing different roles in different environments, the individual constructs multiple versions of themselves, each conditioned to a context, a group, a set of expectations. And here lies the crux of the problem. These versions rarely meet. The you at work does not recognize the you in intimacy. The you on social media is almost a stranger to the real you, the one who cries alone, who feels anger, who doubts, who fails, but who never has space on the stage. The result is what Goffman called the divided self, fragmented, disconnected, without true unity. The performance then ceases to be a choice and becomes a prison. You do not act to communicate something true, you act to survive, to maintain acceptance, to avoid rejection. And without realizing it, you begin to measure your worth by the reactions of others. Your self-esteem becomes hostage to applause. And when the applause does not come, silence turns into self-criticism, guilt, shame. This dynamic is exhausting, and the most tragic part is that many people do not even realize they are trapped in it. They live thinking they are free, when in fact they are just playing roles they learned since childhood. Roles shaped by parents, teachers, media, and systems that reward obedience and punish authenticity. But the essential question continues to echo. Who are you when no one is watching? When there is no audience to please? When the mask can, or should, be removed? What remains? This is the question that most avoid, because the answer can hurt. It can reveal an emptiness. It can expose a hidden anger, or an old fear of not being loved for who you truly are. But this pain is necessary, because it is what begins to break the spell of performance. It is at this point that the individual starts to realize the cost of self-betrayal, not only psychological, but existential. A lifetime built on edited versions of oneself is, by definition, a life that has never been truly lived. And this self-betrayal is not abstract. It appears in the most mundane, almost imperceptible details, but deeply destructive. Commitments you hope will be cancelled, promises you make to yourself and never keep. I'm fine, choked with pain. In the next section, we will dive into these small behaviors and show how they are the clearest signs of a self that has been silenced for too long. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. If someone told you that you betray yourself every day, you would probably deny it. After all, the word betrayal carries a dramatic weight. It is something we associate with major ruptures, with unforgivable deceptions. But self-betrayal rarely happens in grand events. It seeps into the details, in silences, in concessions, in socially acceptable lies. And it is precisely this subtlety that makes it so dangerous. You don't realize you are destroying yourself because you do it in the name of harmony, politeness, peace. But deep down, you are bleeding silently. Let's talk about these behaviors. The first is the classic accepting when you wanted to refuse. You are invited to an event, a meeting, a gathering. Your body says no. Your energy says no. Your will says no. But your mouth says yes. Why? Because you are afraid of disappointing. Because you learned that your refusal can lead to rejection. Because you believe that being accepted is more important than being honest. So you go, Force a smile, tell jokes, listen to conversations that don't interest you, and leave more tired than you arrived. And the most tragic part? You do this all the time. Another common pattern of self-betrayal is making promises to yourself that you never keep. Starting Monday, I will take better care of myself. I will get out of this toxic relationship. I will stop accepting less than I deserve. But Monday comes and nothing changes. Why? Because when your self-esteem depends on the approval of others, you learn to prioritize others' expectations. Your own needs become an annoying detail, something that can wait, that can be postponed, that can be forgotten. You turn into an eternal caretaker of others' desires, while your own rot in the basement of your consciousness. And perhaps the most devastating example of all, hiding your emotions. How many times have you said, "I'm fine," when everything was falling apart? How many times have you smiled in public with tears welling up inside? This is not just a disguise, it is an emotional amputation. Goffman observed that social stages do not tolerate raw truth, intense emotions, vulnerabilities, real pains. All of this threatens the stability of the performance. So, to maintain appearances, you learn to silence yourself. But silence, over time, becomes a prison. These micro-betrayals accumulate. They add up in invisible layers of frustration, guilt, and resentment. You start to feel anger towards people, but deep down, it is anger at yourself for never standing up. You begin to feel tired, but it is a fatigue of existing without being. You start to doubt your own identity, because honestly, you don't even remember who you were before you started playing so many roles. This process is what Goffman called the divided self. Each context demands a different version of you, and when these versions do not communicate with each other, you begin to feel like a stranger within your own skin. There is no cohesion, no unity, no truth. There are only adaptations, concessions, and performances. But what happens when this process intensifies to the point that you no longer feel what you feel? When you act without thinking, respond without reflecting, and live as if you are outside of yourself. This is where we enter the next stage of this disconnection, the phenomenon of existential dissociation. Or, as Goffman defined with surgical precision, the distancing of the role, the complete separation between who you are and what you do. This is what we will talk about next. When Goffman introduced the concept of role distance, he was pointing to one of the most disturbing experiences of contemporary life, the moment when the individual continues to act, fulfilling their functions, but is no longer present within themselves. It is as if there is an invisible separation between the person and the role they represent. And this separation, instead of liberating, paralyzes. You do what needs to be done, respond to what is expected to be heard, complete tasks, smile in social settings. But all of this happens mechanically, anesthetized, empty. The soul there no longer inhabits the body. This type of dissociation does not appear suddenly. It is built layer by layer over years of self-silencing, self-denial, and forced adaptations. It is the final result of a trajectory where performance has overshadowed presence and the expectations of others have imposed themselves over internal will. You do not notice when it begins, but at some point, you look at your routine and realize you are just following a script that you did not even write. This state of role distance generates a very specific symptom, the feeling of living on autopilot. You wake up, follow the agenda, respond to messages, deliver projects, interact with colleagues, but inside, everything seems blurred. There is an emptiness that no achievement fills. You feel disconnected from the things you do, even from those you once loved. Life passes, but you are not in it. More than fatigue or stress, this phenomenon is existential. It is the feeling of being outside oneself. It is observing yourself as if you were another person, following movements that no longer have meaning. And the most tragic part? This has become the norm for millions of people. Living without presence has become the standard. Society not only allows this dissociation, it rewards it. Highly functional, productive, respected people, and completely disconnected from themselves. And it is not just about exhaustion. It is about the absence of identity. When you live only responding to what each social environment demands, you stop listening to your own voice. Over time, you no longer even know what you like, what you feel, what you want. Your choices become automatic reactions to external stimuli. You do not decide, you respond. You do not desire, you obey. You do not live, you execute. Goffman shows us that this distancing is a kind of defense. It occurs when the role we are playing becomes so dissonant in relation to our true self that we can only continue acting if we emotionally disconnect. It is like putting on armor to withstand the pain of not being who you are. And yes, this armor can protect, but it also isolates. It prevents deep contact, true bonding, authenticity. This dissociation has devastating consequences. Superficial relationships, purposeless decisions, a life that seems right on the outside, but rots on the inside. And the most dangerous part is that the longer you remain in this mode of fragmented existence, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before. The performance becomes your only identity, and escaping from it seems impossible. But Goffman offers a way out. And it is not gentle, it is not gradual, it requires rupture. It demands what he called, and what we here call, the strategic collapse of stages. A radical choice to stop performing, to abandon the characters and start living as who you really are, even if that causes discomfort, rejection, or loss. In the next part, we will explore exactly this: how to break this cycle of self-betrayal through the conscious collapse of social stages, an intentional destruction of the illusion you have built and that now traps you. Because only when the masks fall can the truth finally breathe. There comes a point where continuing to perform ceases to be a choice of adaptation and becomes a mechanism of self-destruction. You keep the stages running, smiling when you wanted to cry, agreeing when you wanted to scream, making yourself present where everything inside you is asking for distance, until something inside you simply collapses. But what if that collapse didn't have to be an accident? What if it could be a conscious choice? Goffman didn't write directly about personal liberation, but his theory opens the door to a transformative concept: the strategic collapse of the stages. Unlike the uncontrolled emotional explosion that usually comes after years of accumulated repression, the strategic collapse is a deliberate act of brutal honesty. It's when you, aware of the prison you're in, choose to dismantle the theater, refuse the role, tear up the costume, step off the stage, and finally speak as someone who owes nothing to any audience. But let's be clear, this process is anything but comfortable. Saying no for the first time without justifying yourself can feel like an affront. Showing your real emotions in an environment where you've always been seen as the strong one can cause discomfort. Breaking away from social dynamics that sustained your image can cost friendships, opportunities, even stability. But there's something much more valuable at stake: you. Collapsing the stages is, above all, an act of courage. It's looking into the eyes of others' expectations and saying, "I am not what you projected." It's disobeying the narrative you were taught to live, the one that said your worth depended on pleasing, fitting in, being functional, and starting to write a new story where your authenticity is worth more than any approval. This collapse can start small. It can be that no said without guilt. It can be the refusal of an invitation you would have accepted only out of obligation. It can be stopping to smile automatically in situations that hurt you emotionally. It can be finally telling someone, "That hurts me, and I will no longer tolerate it." Each act of truth is a crack in the stage, and each crack is a step toward freedom. Of course, this will have consequences. Some audiences will distance themselves. People who love the character will reject the real person. Spaces where you were accepted will close. But this is necessary, because those who remain, those who choose to stay even after the collapse, are the only ones who truly see you. They are the ones who offer you connection, not validation. The strategic collapse is painful, but it is a rite of passage, a rebirth. It's where the actor dies and the subject is born, where you stop acting under the eyes of others and start living from your own center, where silence ceases to be suffocation and becomes listening, where loneliness, instead of being abandonment, becomes reconnection. But here arises the most important question. What happens after the collapse? When the stages crumble, when the audience leaves, when silence finally arrives? Who is left? Who are you without the performance? That's where the second phase of the journey begins. The reconstruction of identity from authenticity. And that's what we will talk about in the next part. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. When you decide to stop performing, something profound begins to happen around you. People reorganize themselves. Goffman may not have used exactly these words, but his theory allows us to clearly see this movement, almost like a silent dance of social structure. With each new truth you have the courage to speak. With each boundary you set, with each expectation you refuse to carry, the people around you begin to react. Some distance themselves, others try to force the continuation of the performance, and a few finally see you as you truly are. And here is one of the hardest revelations of this journey. Not everyone around you loves you. Many love the version you offered in exchange for acceptance. Many were attached to the character, the helpful one, the always available one, the one who never complains, the one who always understands. By removing this character from the scene, you disappoint them. You break the invisible contract of agreeability. And because of that, you will lose people. You will create discomfort. You will hear phrases like, "You've changed," or "You're different." But the truth is, you haven't changed. You just stopped lying. This process is unsettling, but absolutely necessary. Because as long as your identity is based on the desire to be accepted by everyone, you will continue to mold yourself to fit into spaces that were never made for your soul. Goffman shows us that social stability depends on a consensus, but this consensus, most of the time, is sustained at the cost of individual authenticity. That peace you felt by pleasing everyone was, in fact, a silent war against yourself. But there is also the other side. When the stages collapse, when the mask falls, when the actor leaves the scene, and the real person appears, something new begins to blossom. Deeper, more honest, more human connections start to form. People who were on the margins of your life come closer. Spaces that once seemed unattainable become accessible. What was once an obligation turns into a choice. And this is one of the greatest gifts of authenticity. You cease to be tolerated and begin to be loved. Not for a character, but for you. This new reorganization of relationships has a transformative effect. The connections that remain become more nourishing, more reciprocal. You no longer need to negotiate your presence, nor hide your pain. You can make mistakes, you can say no, you can have bad days, and still continue to be accepted. Authenticity, not only pushes away what is false, it also attracts what is true. But this only happens after you have the courage to risk loss, after you renounce the illusion of control. And that's when something even more important is revealed: the reconnection with yourself. When the stages quiet down and the audience shrinks, silence remains. And it is in this silence that your true voice can emerge. A voice you may have forgotten. A voice that doesn't need to convince anyone, nor justify its existence, just to exist. But this reconnection demands something more than courage. It demands responsibility. Because now that you have stopped betraying yourself, you need to start honoring what you feel, what you desire, and what you need. You need to start living according to your truth, and no longer according to the expectations of others. And it is precisely this internal commitment, this pact with your own essence, that marks the beginning of true freedom. In the next and final part, we will talk about this rebirth, about how to rebuild a life based on authenticity, about how to make each choice reflect your deepest self, and no longer just a response to the gaze of others. Because now, finally, you are free to be who you are. When the stages crumble and the masks finally fall, what remains is what has always been there, but was silenced. You. Without filters, without roles, without the constant need to please or justify yourself. Just you, naked before your own existence. And this moment is both terrifying and liberating, because now there is no one left to blame. There is no script to follow, no audience to applaud. What exists is a fertile and unexplored ground, your truth. But don't be fooled. This reunion with your own self is not a calm destination where suddenly everything makes sense. On the contrary, this is where the real work begins. After years, sometimes decades, of living under layers of self-abandonment, you will need to rebuild your sense of identity from scratch. You will have to relearn to listen to your own body, to trust your emotions, to respect your limits, and perhaps the most challenging of all, to honor your desires without guilt. It is at this point that many give up. They miss the predictability of old roles, the comfort of masks, the false security of pleasing others. But this nostalgia is a trick of the conditioned mind. The discomfort you feel now is the price of freedom. And freedom, contrary to what many say, is not comfortable. It is demanding. It requires authenticity all the time. It demands that you speak the truth, even when you are trembling. That you say no, even when you fear losing someone. That you choose what is right for you, even when the whole world points in another direction. This process is profoundly lonely, but it is also profoundly true. For the first time, you become the author of your own story. You are no longer reacting to life, you are building it. And on this new path, every choice becomes a mirror. You begin to observe yourself with more honesty. You start to notice the moments when you almost returned to the old role, but chose to remain true to yourself. You begin to recognize the small victories, the day you rested without guilt, the moment you withdrew from a toxic environment, the conversation where you spoke with your heart exposed, without hiding. And perhaps for the first time, you look in the mirror and recognize yourself, not as someone perfect, but as someone whole. Someone who doesn't need to betray themselves to be loved. Someone who, instead of performing, simply exists. And that changes everything. Because when you stop betraying yourself, the world around you begins to reorganize. The opportunities that arise are more coherent. The people who remain are more genuine. And life, finally, begins to taste like life, not like acting. So, if something in this video touched you, write in the comments, "No more abandoning myself." Write it as a public commitment to your truth. And if you feel that this journey is still at the beginning, keep watching. The next video